Every human being on planet Earth is in agreement that EA has handled the rights to Star Wars video games just terribly, including myself. When EA announced all of these Star Wars projects that they had in development, I was extremely excited, and now I'm very disappointed to see that many of those projects have been canceled. And back during what I would call the golden age of LucasArts, the amount of quality Star Wars video games that were created dwarfs EA's progress so far. And I've played most of these great Star Wars games. And based off of my experiences with them, I was fairly let down when both of EA and DICE's Battlefront games released. But both of these games have improved since their respective launch dates. And I think Battlefront 2's quality is slowly becoming on par with those Star Wars games that came before it. And in its current state, better than at least a couple of them. And before anyone starts to take this video the wrong way, I'm not here to convince you to go out and buy this game immediately, nor do I want this video to make you look back less fondly on the original Star Wars Battlefront 2. I just want to tell you why I enjoy Battlefront 2 in its current state. And trust me, I won't skip over any issues I have with the game right now. I also haven't forgotten any of the controversies the game's had at its launch. I just think this game is a good Star Wars multiplayer shooter. I say that because I won't be talking much about this game's single player component. The quality of this game's single player campaign is nowhere near its multiplayer. If you like what you've heard so far, then please enjoy the video. So now that all that intro junk is out of the way, here's where I get to tell you that I was a really big fan of the original Star Wars Battlefront 2 back in the day. I was a kid, I was born in the late 90s, so I grew up with the prequels movies. I loved them. As any young boy would, I loved the military and the war aspect of the Star Wars prequels. I loved clones versus droids. Obviously, I wanted to experience that stuff in other ways, and video games were the perfect way to do that. I have a lot of nostalgia for these games that were released around the prequels, and I'm sure many others do too. And it's kind of ridiculous that EA and DICE didn't capitalize on that nostalgia. They kind of just wanted to make a game that was playable to casuals and just anyone who likes Star Wars, but they really could have worked that nostalgia from people who played the original game. And that's not to say that they should have just remade the original Battlefront 2. I actually think that they do things a little bit better than the original Star Wars Battlefront 2 in some aspects of the game, but they should have kept that foundation, that open-ended capture point gameplay. Just blow it up to the size of their Battlefield games, 64 players in a match. And even though the core foundation of that original game was kind of tossed out the window, I think DICE did right by these games in a lot of ways, and I just want to explain why. Probably the first thing you should ask of a game is to be fun to play, and I think Star Wars Battlefront 2 is really fun to play. It is a shooter, and obviously the most important aspect of a shooter is the gunplay. I think there are plenty of shooters out there who do shooting mechanics better than Star Wars Battlefront 2, but Star Wars Battlefront 2's mechanics are a little bit different than your average military shooter like Call of Duty and Battlefield. In those games, your bullets connect with your enemy immediately after you've fired them, as opposed to Battlefront's blasters that fire projectiles that take a little bit of time to reach the target.
Ion damage to one transport.
This leads to engagements where you end up having to lead your shots a lot of the time, especially at range. It doesn't sound like much, but it really adds to the overall feedback that the mechanics give to you. It really sets apart the game as a science fiction shooter. The game's visuals make you feel like you're on a Star Wars planet, while the game's gunplay make you feel like you're using a Star Wars blaster. The mechanics of the original Battlefront 2 weren't far off from this game, but it was a lot clunkier and a little less refined. It felt like you had a lot less control of where the projectiles were going based off of where you were aiming. This was all fine back in the day, but I don't think anyone's arguing that the game's gunplay hasn't been improved since the original game. I think Battlefront 2's game modes are very important because they feel drastically different from each other. There are modes that only allow you to play as troopers, modes that only allow you to play as starfighters, and modes that only allow you to play as heroes. And of course, Galactic Assault throws all those ways to play into one single mode. This gives the game a whole lot of variety, because these different modes can feel like completely different games from one another. People play this game differently. Some people mostly play the small trooper based modes like Blast. I know people who hate and love Starfighter Assault. There are people who play that game mode all the time, and there are some that haven't touched it since launch. And I think the most consistently played game modes are Heroes vs. Villains and Galactic Assault. Personally, I don't play small trooper based game modes like Blast or Ewok Hunt because I don't like that gameplay loop of running and gunning until you die. All the other game modes like Galactic Assault, Starfighter Assault, and Heroes vs. Villains I think are done very well. I think Starfighter Assault showcases some of the best Starfighter dogfighting mechanics that you can ask for, and it allows you to shoot proton torpedoes at cool targets like Star Destroyers and Mon Calamari cruisers. Heroes vs. Villains put your favorite Star Wars characters against each other, and playing this game mode really allows you to appreciate the different abilities that the characters have and how they interact with each other. The game mode gives you the opportunity to outsmart your opponent based on how well you know the game's mechanics and what characters you're using. The most popular game mode in the game would have to be Galactic Assault, and that's probably because it allows most of the units in the game to interact with each other on the same battlefield. There are a lot of things that this game mode does right and wrong, but I think it's the most popular because it's most cinematic and it allows people to use whatever unit they want for whatever situation they're in. You can blast up the hallways on Kamino as a super battle droid. You can strafe run the entrance to Starkiller Base in a starfighter. Or you can assault the hangars of Hoth as Darth Vader.
You defy me?
There is depth to Star Wars Battlefront 2's gameplay, even if it isn't as deep as some of its competitors. What DICE really needed to get right about this game is that it had to feel like Star Wars. No, I'm not saying that it has to feel like you're watching a Star Wars movie, but it has to feel like you're in the Star Wars universe while you're playing. And I think Star Wars Battlefront 2 feels like you're playing a character in a Star Wars battle. Even though all the previous aspects of this game that I mentioned do contribute to the feeling of being in a Star Wars battle, I think there are two aspects of this game that really drive that feeling home. The first aspect being the graphics and the art design. Every asset in this game is based off of a Star Wars movie, except things from other kinds of media like Obi-Wan Kenobi's Clone Wars appearance. Aside from visuals, voiceovers from different factions tell you what's exactly going on in each battle that you're in, even though some of these voiceovers work better than others.
Ha-ha! Nicely done, boys. Nicely done. Separatists are falling back and our fleet's arriving in system. I'd call this a victory.
We're clear to go. And I've got the droid. Sure hope this piece of junk makes a difference. Everyone move! Yeah!
So far, I've talked about things that I think the game has done pretty well. Even next to the game's shortcomings, these aspects will most likely stand out to players as well done. But now I would like to talk about some things that I like or dislike about the game based on my own personal preference. Some players might agree with these opinions, some might not. These are still my more personal, stronger opinions regardless. So these are some things that I personally really enjoy about the game. I really enjoy the Starfighter Assault game mode, but more importantly the actual Starfighter gameplay. I like the way that Starfighter Assault is structured. It feels like you're destroying a goal in a squadron, whether that's from the Empire or the Rebels or, Clone Wars, whatever, but it wouldn't work if it didn't feel good to pilot your Starfighter. And I know a lot of people play this on mouse and keyboard, and mouse and keyboard isn't really that best to control the starfighters in this game, but I use a controller and it feels great. It feels great barrel rolling in a dogfight, it feels great zooming in on your target, it's a great experience in my opinion. On the topic of fun gameplay, I really also enjoy the diverse abilities of the heroes. Even though not all of these abilities are balanced or sometimes they might not work all the time, especially Luke's force abilities, I appreciate the amount of options you have when booting up a heroes versus villains game. You've got defensive heroes that can stay alive and keep your teammates alive. Offensive heroes that are best played by constantly applying pressure to the enemy team, as well as so many other play styles like characters that work best with hit and run tactics and some characters that just stun you essentially. And despite all of this, people are usually just gonna pick lightsaber heroes. But personally, I appreciate all of the different play styles in all the heroes. I also enjoy how all the special units in the game feel different from one another. Again, they're not all balanced with each other, but they feel distinct in the way that they play. Most of the vehicles control how you thought they did when you watch the movies. All of the aerial units fulfill the same role, but they don't feel exactly the same. This is mostly due to their weapons, but in the case of the rocket droid, he actually moves a lot different than the other troopers. I really like the selection of enforcers that the dark side has. Not so much the light side, we'll get into that later, but I love playing as the Flame Trooper, the Super Battle Droid, and the Death Trooper. The Flame Trooper is probably the most unique unit in the game. All of his abilities just burn the enemies and does damage over time. Now, I really like the Super Battle Droids in this game, and it's for a very specific reason. Back in the original Battlefront 2, I hated Super Battle Droids. Why were the Super Battle Droids in OG Battlefront 2 the generic rifleman class? Why weren't B1 Battle Droids in this class instead? Not only did I want to play as a regular old B1 Battle Droid, but I thought Super Battle Droids were much tougher than that. Another Star Wars game that I was playing alongside Star Wars Battlefront 2 was Star Wars Republic Commando. And in this game, Super Battle Droids were monsters. It took forever with regular blasters to defeat them. The best way to fight them was with explosives or anti-droid grenades. And now they're just as menacing in Star Wars Battlefront 2. The presence they have on the battlefront compared to the original are night and day.
Organic ally arriving.
The Death Trooper is pretty similar to the Super Battle Droid, but one thing, their grenade is very fun to use. Their grenade damages enemies but also reveals enemies through walls. This makes Death Troopers really fun to play in certain situations, especially when you're defending an objective. But Death Troopers aren't perfect, and there is something that I strongly dislike about them. So starting off with my personal gripes about this game are the Death Troopers, more specifically their guns. The Death Troopers just have the regular old heavy blaster for the Imperials, yet in Rogue One we see them on multiple occasions wielding what seems like a blaster rifle made specifically for Death Troopers. The movie does show them using other weapons, but I think that's a sniper rifle, one that's even in the game as well. I can't recall them in the movie wielding that heavy blaster that they use in the game. I'm sure all the gear that the Death Troopers have in-game is canon, but it would have just felt more immersive if we got to play the Death Troopers that we saw in the Rogue One film. And it would have even diversified the gameplay a little bit. I mean, as far as weapons go, the Death Troopers and the Super Battle Droids are pretty much the same. Their weapons fire automatically and they have a high fire rate. Even their overload abilities do the same thing. It increases the fire rate of their weapons and it slows their movement speed. The Death Troopers had the same weapon in Battlefront 2015. That means they had multiple years to develop this change and make a more immersive Death Trooper experience, but they just went with the same thing they did in the first game. I know this specific criticism seems like a bit of a nitpick, but considering everything they've changed for Battlefront 2 from the first game, it feels like they could have done this no problem. The next issue I have with this game is pretty much unanimously agreed upon by the community that Wookiees are the most consistent detriment this game's had. This game almost made me hate Wookiees, like straight up racism against Wookiees. But considering Star Wars has only given me reasons to love Wookiees up until the release of this game, I think my love for Wookiees as a fictional alien race is still pretty strong. But in all seriousness, across all the eras that this game lets you play in, the light side Enforcer class is occupied by Wookiees. And I already explained why I like the diversity of the dark side Enforcer classes. There is a different dark side Enforcer for every era in the game. But the problems with Wookiees run deeper than just having to play them in every match you play. For almost the entirety of the year that this game was out, Wookiees were extremely overpowered. They've recently been nerfed and aren't as crazy as they used to be, but even things like their thermal imploder are still really annoying. Now, moving on to another issue that I have that doesn't have to do with one specific character, but multiple characters, and those characters are heroes that can use the Force, and how easy it is for them to get insta-kills on you by pushing you off a ledge. Normally, I'm not a big fan of instant death in video games. I have multiple exceptions to this, like games where enemies telegraph their insta-kill abilities to you so you have plenty of time to react, or games like one of my favorite shooters out right now, Rainbow Six Siege, where paying attention to your surroundings and checking your corners and your sight lines are integral to the game's gameplay. While Star Wars Battlefront 2's gameplay is a little bit more simpler, you really just try to outsmart your opponent, and whoever does the most amount of damage first survives and the other one dies. Plenty of people out there would argue that throwing someone off a ledge and making them fall to their death is in fact outsmarting their enemy, and rightfully so. However, I personally don't feel accomplished when I press a button and my enemy flies off into the abyss. I personally enjoy watching their health bar slowly go down until I defeat them. So I guess you could just chalk this criticism up as not really a fault with the game, but me just complaining, especially since there are so many games out these days that let you insta-kill in such a way, like throwing your opponent off a ledge. But a criticism that I think has a little bit more weight is the stamina system and lightsaber mechanics as a whole. When a lightsaber hero is fighting another hero, whether that be another hero with a lightsaber or a hero with a blaster, I think it's safe to say that it's kinda wonky. If you attempt to attack an enemy with your lightsaber, they're either going to block it or roll away, depending on if they're a blaster hero or another lightsaber hero, or it's going to connect and you're going to hit your enemy. But it's not always that simple. When you get hit with a lightsaber, you get staggered and are left vulnerable for a small amount of time. And if you end up blocking a lightsaber with another lightsaber, both of you get pushed back and essentially staggered in the same way. So this means no matter what happens at the end of someone's lightsaber swing, someone's getting staggered. It's not as fluid as it should be, and it always devolves into you mashing the attack button and the block button, hoping that you come out doing more damage. Sometimes you don't even get to land an attack on the other lightsaber hero, because they just block until their stamina runs out, and then they can run away. This is something that definitely needs to be fixed as soon as possible, because lightsaber fights in this game are in dire need of depth. My point being, the ways that the heroes can defend themselves needs to be tweaked. It hasn't really been tweaked much since launch. I know they recently did some tweaks to stamina from different heroes to global tweaks to all the heroes, but I think DICE just needs to sit down and polish things up a bit, which I actually hear that they are doing, and that would make game modes like Heroes vs. Villains so much better. But my final criticism of this game is going to have to go to the linear objective-based gameplay. Not only does this reduce your freedom as a player, but it also gets really frustrating when your teammates aren't contributing to the objective. Especially in Galactic Assault, you are required to coordinate and push the objective together. So as many of the people who play this game know, how much fun you have playing this game hinges on how committed your teammates are to doing the objective. DICE has revealed that they are working on a more non-linear game mode, so fingers crossed that that game mode will give us what we want and give us more freedom and less reliance on your teammates' ability to do the objective.
That's cool. Roll up your sleeves, boys. You want back? Any Republic ships. Demolition mission failure imminent.
That's all I really have to say about Star Wars Battlefront 2. I know I finished off this video with a bunch of harsh criticism, but I really think this game is slowly improving and becoming the game that we all thought it was going to be at launch. If you enjoy videos like this or topics similar to this one, please revisit my channel anytime. Hopefully I'll have a new video for you to watch when you do. My name is Gunner. Thank you so much for watching this video.